Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand Leadership in Government Awards for 2015. I'm Emma Alberici. I'll be your MC for this evening, and I do hope you'll all enjoy what's set to be a really terrific lineup of speakers, and later on also quite an impressive panel of discussion which we'll have. Now, excuse me, I know that most of you have been really excited about our guest speaker tonight. I know it's a sellout crowd. There's been scalpers outside. It's crazy. So I want to tell you, you won't have to wait too long before Lee White will be up here. And we also have another speaker. Bob Geldof is in the room, and he'll be giving you an address, of course. And on the panel, now I have to show my age, we'll be also convening quite a stellar cast, including former Victorian Police Commissioner Christine Nixon, former High Court Justice Michael Kirby, Maori philosopher and educator and public speaker Nahi Otera Bidwa, superstar basketball coach Carrie Graff, and Labor MP Andrew Lee. Coincidentally, I was discussing leadership just last week with the Race Discrimination Commissioner, Tim Soutphommasane, and he put us through a really useful exercise which I'd like to share with you. So if I can ask you all just for a moment to close your eyes. I want you all to imagine a leader, just for a minute. Just imagine a leader. Now you can all open your eyes. And what he said at the end was, I bet none of you thought of a woman. I bet she wasn't black. She didn't have a disability. She probably wasn't any other ethnicity than a white, male, middle-aged bloke. It's something to think about. Something to think about when it comes to our own unconscious biases, and something we need to overcome. So, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Please turn your phones off, or if you want to live tweet the event, put them on silent. You'll find bathrooms in the foyer, and main courses will be served in about an hour at about 8 o'clock. Please join me now in welcoming Auntie Jeanette, who will perform tonight's Welcome to Country.
I thought of my daughter. She's a pocket rocket. She's also the only female child in a household of 6 boys. So she's got it together. This room shines absolutely brilliant. I am absolutely humbled every time I do the Welcome to Country, or as I call it, acknowledgement. I am a descendant of the ancient Ngunnawal people, now called Ngunnawal. I honour all those that have gone before me. I especially honour my grandfather, and I especially honour my parents. I tell people too, by these gorgeous pink cheeks of mine, there's a touch of Celt. Splish on Daddy's side of Irish, and a Highland Catholic Scot who fled what the bottom end was doing to the land. They thought sheep were more important than people. I was just reading the booklet there and thinking, what would I say? And I think Mr. Geldof in the room. You don't get to meet many famous people at my age. Important people, but not famous. I thought he put it beautifully in the sense that what are accountants? Well, someone's got to count the money. I thought that was hysterical and so funny, because that's true. Someone has to count the beans. I have had the most amazing fortune in the last week. I went to the business gala ball. You should have seen that. That was so swishy. On last night, I had the absolute privilege of meeting 3 senior men from Yuendamu They are handing back to the nation for preservation an unbelievably sacred Tajana board. And we, the people, own that. And I looked at those men and I knew that was so hard for them to let that go. But it's such an amazing thing that they did. It was one of the older men, his father and his grandfather. Now that belongs to the nation. Because people will come from everywhere at some point to see this because they're such rare sights, you don't see them. I often maintain with tourism, they don't come to see our visitors, and I'm sorry half of you in the room here. There's a lot of really good-looking Europeans floating around that they can look at. They come to see who we are, Australia. We are, as I said to Mr. Obama, best country on earth. But we have views that will take your breath away. Anybody seen Ayers Rock at sunrise or sunset? And know they're standing in the centre of the world. The second visit I went to on the same night was the Disability Awards for people who have incredible disabilities. They have invented things to make life easier. And I was thinking to myself at some of the inventions, gee, I hope they have a good accountant. I have been to the top end of the Kimberleys, where an Aboriginal community, the Ballybow Artist Colony, was ripped off by thieves to the tune of 2.2 million because they trusted people to care for the money that provides education, air conditioning, very, very simple things to the wider community. And I thought, wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful that we could have Aboriginal CPAs? Because I think CPA after your name is good as a PhD. I only have a master's in education, so, kind of down here. The welcome to country in itself is a blessing. That while you are in this land of the Noongar people, that you are safe. I ask those of you who have chosen this as your home to work hard, share your cleverness, and Canberrians are clever. We did top the IQ test. Your smarts, your wisdom, because I remind people that big white house on the hill is the most expensive office in the world. They don't live here, they go home, and the rest of us just get on with our lives that live here in Canberra. The second thing, for those of you who have travelled from interstate or from overseas, as there is elders in this room, Canberrians are wonderful people, but put us in a car, put us on the roads, and we lose our freaking mind. We don't run orange lights here in Canberra. We run red lights. We just love the thrill of running red lights. And I live right where there's a big set of lights, and I see it every day. And those little stripes on the road. I have been bowled nearly 4 times just crossing because you think they're safe, but they're not. So please be careful on our roads. And I say that for a very specific reason. When they bought the books for bringing them home for Aboriginal people several years ago, a woman who actually came from WA, within a half an hour of landing, sadly, was killed at Monica. I mean, she come from way out in the desert somewhere, had no idea how Canberrians drive. So please be careful. As I said, thank you for this honour to acknowledge those of us who are descendants is without words. English sometimes is a very difficult language. It's like, yes, no, thank you, go away. There are no words to say thank you to all of you. It is absolutely important that we look after our country and we do the right thing. And I think a good, qualified CPA does that. And I don't know whether you're all accountants, because, gosh, there's a lot of you out there. Please have a wonderful evening. And to the graduates, there are graduates tonight, aren't there? Have a wonderful time. The road is long. Don't make it hard. Always do the right thing. Thank you again. And to each and every one of you, welcome, welcome, and welcome, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Auntie. I'd now like to invite Lee White to the stage. He is a face that I am sure is familiar to all of you. He is, of course, the CEO of Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. Please welcome Lee White.
Good evening. Thank you, Emma, for that introduction, and it's not often you hear your name mentioned along with Bob Geldof, so I think I'll keep that one and tuck it away somehow. So welcome. Thank you very much for coming here tonight, and I mean that sincerely, because, we prepare these events, we put a lot of time and effort, but unless we actually feel they're having an impact for the right reasons, we wouldn't continue them. But your support means that they're valued, and particularly in terms of the Leadership in Government Awards. Now, since 2009, we've been hosting these awards and been very proud of what we've done. But each year we try and make them a little bit different to have a different form of impact and a sense of achievement. And in the spirit of our most recent journey, as many of you would know, bringing Australia and New Zealand together, our awards now are covering, as you can see from our signs up here and the symbols, our two countries are covering both these awards, and we will continue to integrate that as our membership continues to grow in the way that we've set out to achieve. Second point I'd like to make is particularly to recognise Renee, who's chatting away down there, but no matter, I won't ask her to stand up. But and when I say Renee, I don't just mean Renee, I mean all of her team that has made this actually possible. So to all of my colleagues, thank you. You really are a fantastic team to work with. I'm very privileged to be able to serve you, to allow me to serve our members as well. So all the hard work that's gone into tonight, thank you. I say thank you to Renee because she does drive a lot of this, but she doesn't do it alone. So to all that have helped, very much appreciated. And the final piece I make, because we've got a very busy time tonight and an entertaining one as well. In front of you there is our thought leadership paper, our piece which is to engender conversation or even good arguments around what diversity might mean and inclusiveness. Now, this is a call for a discussion. It shouldn't be read in a way that this is the be-all and end-all, because where we feel we can make the right impact for the prosperity of our countries of Australia and New Zealand is to ensure there's good debate. And if we can engender that good debate, then we can have influence, and therefore influence is good for the prosperity of our countries. Thank you very much. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Lee. And now to our extra special guest, Bob Geldof, and please indulge me while I read you his very expansive CV, and I will be doing that for all our panellists as well because I think they deserve acknowledgement for their incredible achievements. Bob Geldof has been voted one of the best business and political speakers in the world, someone who draws on his personal experiences and the lessons learned from his groundbreaking charity concert Live Aid, which marked its 30th anniversary just this year. Sir Bob managed to gather the world's biggest musical acts to raise funds for famine relief in Africa. The event was held simultaneously at Wembley Stadium in London and JFK Stadium in Philadelphia on July 13th, 1985. Doesn't that make you feel old? The event was watched by an estimated 1.5 billion people worldwide, featured 16 hours of live music and raised about $415 million on the day and in ongoing merchandise sales. Born in Dublin whenever, Bob Geldof began a career in journalism before forming the rock group Boomtown Rats in 1975. After Boomtown Rats created a series of hits, Sir Bob emerged as one of the best-known pop personalities of his era. I'm not telling you anything you don't know there. In 1984, Bob Geldof turned his attention, as we all know, to the dreadful famine that was plaguing Ethiopia and organised the 85 Live Aid benefit for starving African children. Between 1986 and 2001, Bob Geldof published his autobiography, Is That It?, and recorded 4 solo albums. By 1992, he had established himself as a highly astute businessman. He was co-owner of the television production house Planet 24, went on to start online travel agent Deckchair.com and 10 Alps Communications, a diverse media company, whose successful productions included high-profile documentary series for the BBC. In 2005, Sir Bob completed a TV series for BBC One, Geldof in Africa, in which he travelled through Africa and explored the continent that the rest of the world seemed to have forgotten. He later produced a well-received book of the same name. In 1986, in recognition of his humanitarian efforts, he was knighted. In 2005, he received a Brits Lifetime Achievement Award for his outstanding contribution to music, and this year he was made a Fellow of Mansfield College, Oxford. Please put your hands together and welcome Sir Bob Geldof.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, that's all very impressive, but 40 years on in rock and roll, I'm speaking to a bunch of bloody accountants. And the reason for that is because I actually have an accountant who has a geography degree and nothing else. And so I'm forced to spend a day in Australia and then go back to London to earn a crust. But thank you very much, everybody, and to Janet. I'm sceptical often about these sort of emotive connections to a place, and you spoke beautifully, and it's actually an object lesson in your measured tone and your softness and your quietude, how everybody focused on it. And you know, I was talking to Lee actually earlier and saying, you know, what's all this stuff about, you know, everywhere we go, there's a prayer almost to the land. And I actually think what it's about is that it connects the later arrivals to the country, that there was almost a disconnection between any of the new arrivals from those early boats up to the present, and suddenly this acknowledgement of this ancientness and this incredibly brilliant, creative concept of this creation myth of the Dreamtime, which is an extraordinary cultural artifact, was extended out to everybody who arrived here laterally, and they in turn who felt disconnected from wherever they left and who kept calling this the lucky country. We're missing something, and this is a bit odd, we're perhaps missing something spiritually, and that this sort of prayer before these meetings, which could be seen as a bit of a, you know, a laugh really, in fact connects people in an entirely different way with the land and who they are, irrespective of where they came from. And as I said, I'm skeptical of these things, but actually you put it very beautifully and very movingly. So it's the first time that I've actually understood that, so it's worth the visit just for that alone. Yes, thank you for the laborious welcome. It did go on a bit, you know, which is good because it limits my time. Again, I was saying to Lee that my immediate background, my 2 sets of grandparents are Belgian Catholic, English Jewish, German Protestant, and Irish nothing. And I got entirely the Irish nothing. Excellent. And before I continue, when I say Irish nothing, can I just say what a lamentable performance Ireland put up at the World Cup, but congratulations to the most amazing team I've ever seen playing rugby, the Kiwis, at the World Cup this year. And, you know, the Aussies had a good 15 minutes in the entire... But when Dan Carter got a drop goal, hey, it was over. Absolutely incredible performance. And I was saying to the New Zealanders here that I got one day in all black, made me a presentation of, what do you call the fish hook thing? Yeah, that thing. And I brought it home, and my dad, of the very few things that I've brought home and laid at my father's door as tributes, that's the only thing he got framed and put up on his wall. Quite rightly, I'm very proud of it. This issue of diversity can be reduced to almost an absurdity now, reductio ad absurdum. So many times it can just be the narcissism of small things. I'm this, I'm that, I'm the other, you must respect that. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that that works. Because we are beset right now with issues that bedevil us that in effect are nothing else but diversity. Coming over from Thailand on the plane, I shared Phuket with the judge. Unfortunately, we weren't in the same place, and we'd probably got drunk together and stayed a little bit longer. But on the way over last night, I had The Nation from yesterday, and I just pulled out this single page, which is the world section. And every single story in this is to do with that tired trope of diversity. I don't think you're going to get much illumination from the document that you guys spent a fortune putting together. But it, because I've read it. But this thing here was astonishing. I mean, it was in my head that I was coming here and meeting you guys. And I was reading these stories individually. So at the top, you've got Jakarta moves closer to Beijing. Jakarta famously was aligning itself, and more imperatively with the United States, in opposition to the growing massive superpower. And the new guy has suddenly changed tack and wants to get in closer with the Chinese, I guess so he can hop the ball and have his options. You're looking at a complete shift. You're looking at a political diversity taking place. It could be significant. Beside it is cultural. Have faith. Not even ISIS can hold the march of the non-believers. You're looking at cultural diversity, incredible statistics, where he said of every 10 people in the world, 3 are Christian, 2 are Muslims, 2 are Hindus, 1.5 are non-religious, and 1.5 are everything else. And in America, the combination of Muslims, Mormons, and Jews are less than the number of non-believers, who are growing faster than Southern Baptists. Not that you'd understand that looking at the tripe that's coming out of the Republican nomination process at the moment. And what you're seeing here is this massive diversity, this great change, which is the essence of this thing we're talking about, and the fear of that change. And I'll come to that. Here you've got Chinese farms could doom modern medicine, and this is really serious. Because despite everything we've talked about, despite everything we're watching on the television, despite our fears, what's happening in China is because of the overuse of the strongest antibiotics in chickens and cows, those pesky microbes have come up with a way of beating them. Now, if that happens, not if actually, what the biologists are saying, it's not an if, it's a when. When that happens, you can eliminate all modern medicine up to this point. What's actually happening is nature, biological diversity, happening at thousands of times our ability to negotiate it. So if you get food poisoning one night, E. coli, if you get salmonella, you'll be dead. And this is happening right now. So diversity takes into account the entire way we live. And what it is a function of this phenomenon that we've gotten used to, called globalization. That great planetary swirl of people, capital, and ideas that so terrifies the fundamentalists, because they must acknowledge difference. They must acknowledge different ideas. And they're frightened. All that horror, all that death cultism, as I think Malcolm Turnbull called it a couple of nights ago, stems from a great fear. And that fear is mirrored by us, because we don't understand how you could be such an animal, how you could be so evil, evil incarnate, that you behave in this manner. So why? Why now? Why at the beginning of this century, which is so radically different to 15 years ago? See, in my life, which was touched upon at length, Ireland was, unicultural in effect. And because of pop music, that great global transference of ideas, my life wasn't great at the time. My mum died when I was 6 or 7. My dad sold towels around the countryside of Ireland, so he'd go away on Monday, come back on Friday. So myself and my 2 sisters were left to our own devices. And the net result of that was that obviously I didn't do any schoolwork when I came home. There was no one to make me do it, but also there wasn't any cash, so we didn't have TV or phones or fridges, no distractions. So I just listened to the radio and read the books from the school library. And what the radio was telling me, what it was articulating, was the need for change in 1963. The articulation of that change, the desirability of change, the necessity of change, the inevitability of change, and that it was to be welcomed and brought to us as soon as possible. And of course, you know the names of the young boys and girls who are articulating that change: Jagger, Lennon, Dylan, Pete Townsend. And of course, in the conditions that I was living in, this was the golden thread thrown down to me from that most improbable of microstates, Luxembourg, which had the sole rock and roll radio program in Europe. And so I clung to these siren voices in a desperate need to get out of my circumstances as they articulated other universes, other possibilities. And because I was following this, I began reading the books that they were telling me to read or suggesting I read. And eventually I got to James Baldwin because I'd read Bob Dylan was reading James Baldwin, and I read Cry the Beloved Country about South Africa. And I say this to you because I genuinely couldn't then and can't now understand what was happening there. Why an entire people could be disenfranchised, dehumanized, put upon, beaten down, beaten up, because of a difference. That difference could be you had red hair, or you supported a different football team, or in this case, they had a different skin color. And I know it sounds naive, but give me a break, I was 11, but I still don't get it at all. And I just thought it was an intellectual absurdity. I couldn't understand it. And so at the age of 13, myself and my friend Mick Foley, we began the Anti-Apartheid Movement at school, which spread out. And essentially we began it to stop the Springboks coming to Ireland and playing rugby, because there was a cultural boycott on, and plus the fact we were going to get And it succeeded. We got about 60,000 people out on the street, and we stopped them playing. We didn't invade the pitch or anything. It was just became too difficult for everyone. And so I learned that rock and roll was not only the articulation of change, but it was also the platform, not only the rhetoric of change, but it was the platform itself. That was the lesson for me, which subsequently, through the Rats and through Live Aid, I was able to put into expression. And last year, one of my family, one of the German, Belgian, English, Irish crowd, my Auntie Fifi, died on the 1st of January. And she was 106. And she was a strong old bird, but at 103, she drifted off into that other place that very old people go, and they escape the degradation and humiliation of age. And before she drifted off, I asked her whether there was any difference, if she remembered from being a tiny little girl, in the Geldof family around 1914. Did she remember any tensions in the family about this great impending catastrophe that was about to happen? And I was asking her because the anniversary of that cataclysm was upon us. And I remembered 1963. I was, as I said, young. And I remember my dad, with his ear this time, stuck to the radio and listening to the news of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I'd never seen my father so intent, so worried in front of us. And I said to him, "What's up?" And he just looked at me, and I literally remember he said, "There might be a war." And I said, "When?" And he said, "Tomorrow." And I said, "What'll happen?" And he said, "That'll be it." And I remember the priests running up and down the aisles in the study hall and the swish of their soutanes as they ran up and down, whispering to each other. There was a great fear, a great tension in the room. And I wondered if Auntie Fifi remembered that. And she said, no, she couldn't remember anything like that. And yet the generation older than her was about to be wiped off the face of the earth. And I'm telling you this because I don't know about you, but I get the sense that the 21st century hasn't started yet. We're stuttering, we're stumbling to start, that we're still using the paradigms of 2000, 15 years ago, another century, and they're no longer applicable. And there's a real reason for that. Because 25 years ago, this year, a young British scientist in CERN in Switzerland wrote a memo to his boss saying that over his Christmas holidays, could he put together this idea he was calling the World Wide Web to talk to his friends, to talk to fellow scientists. He'd written the language that he could code into computers, and what did he think about it? And I've seen that 2-page document, and at the top, his boss wrote, "Nice idea, do you think it'll work?" It is one of the foundation documents of humanity. It is utterly profound because in your pockets on the table is conceivably the greatest invention in human history. Now, that's a big claim. But nonetheless, consider what that little thing that we all have, which very few of us can function without, which contains our memory, literally that's the word we use, and everything that is important on our day-to-day lives, and plus in our lives in general. In 25 years, from a 2-page idea memo to this, we know for certain that it's completely altered the world economy. We know for certain that the speed that that economy moves utterly games the system. Lee and I talked about this earlier. We know that it's not honest, and yet we've got no other mechanism for dealing with the swirl of what is now the global economy. But what hasn't happened in our confusion in how to monitor this and how to guide it and how to work with it is that the politics haven't kept pace. And politics always follow the economy, always. Democracy came when an economy had been established that allowed for the merchants to grow and establish some sort of middle class. Once you establish a mean, you require choice. You require elective representational government. Most of the world doesn't have that. And daily and nightly, we see the result. That's 25 years. And then I thought back to the conversation with Fifi. And I thought back of that terminal, near-terminal century, the 20th century, which most of us lived through, our century. That murderous, suicidal, wretched 75-year war, which is what history will remember that century for. 1914 to 1989. Why? What happened? A guy shoots an aging archduke in Serbia, in Sarajevo, and the world explodes. Was it Germany's fault? No, not really. You can't lay it entirely at the feet of the Germans. Not that one. Round 2, certainly, but not that one. The Austrians wanted revenge on Serbia. The Russians said, you go to Serbia, we'll fight you. The Germans said, you're fighting them, you're fighting Austria, we're fighting you. The French joined in, the Brits joined in, and 4 years later, 2 generations of young boys and some girls are dead. This mass bloodletting, this inconceivable carnage. For why? They too had the determining technology of their time. It wasn't the internet and the web, it was the internal combustion engine and the telephone. The 2 things that made the economies of the 20th century, that altered the very way we live and therefore the way we thought. This vast exchange of ideas, this diversity of thought that allows for newer things to occur, that created entire new polities, that devastated the old order completely. Gone were the empires, gone were the kings, gone were the Tsars, gone were the boys and girls. There were so few that things couldn't really work out, so you get to round 2, and then the regime under which I lived, which was the constant existential threat of the bomb, which is what I remembered from 1963. And then I went further back because this year is the anniversary of another great global cataclysm, probably the first globalized war in reality, the Napoleonic Wars. And 200 years ago today, or not today, but this year, the Battle of Waterloo, which in one day killed more men than a week on the Somme. One day of swords, of old-style cannons, of canister shot. Why? Why did that happen? Certainly in the wake of it, the old order completely changed again. But at that time too, the determinant technology of the 19th century was present, the steam engine. The industrial age was waiting to be born, and from it would come the economy that we know today. But it couldn't get going. Couldn't get going. It needed this vast terminal battle of ideas. 1815, 1914, 2015. Do you want to turn on the telly and have a look? Because every one of us here travel all the time. You're Australians, you kind of have to. A lot. And I'm fearful, I'm very fearful. I know this is a celebration, I know it's the best in class are getting their day tonight or their night tonight, and deservedly so. But tonight is about diversity. Turn on the television and what you've seen are the utter resistance to change, an utter resistance to new ideas, a going back to pre-medievalism. And it's not just them, it's us. We're hearing that the fundamentalists, the murderers, have now penetrated the dark web, that they're beyond our sight. But in truth, our own personal dark webs, we've retreated into fear. The same fear that controls them. They have no self-confidence, these people, out there with their beheadings. They're afraid. They're not brave. They're utterly cowardly. We know that. It's easy. It's so easy to be a radical. Give me a gun, bang. It's so much harder to sit down, listen, be tolerant, empathetic, understand, move forward. It is the nature of things. I use the word in its literal sense. Businesses are the entities that live, die, and replicate in the economy, as humans and all the other species do in the environment. But businesses find it hard to adapt to evolutionary adaptability. They find it easier to do their quarterly reports and their 5-year plans, but they shouldn't. They need to be more flexible because that's what the new economy determines. And new technologies that destroy outmoded industries like the record industry will also destroy outdated logics, and it has already. So where is our Darwin, Freud, and Marx? They had already written the 20th century. In 1915, we didn't know that except for a few artists who welcomed this carnage. They couldn't wait for the 20th century to get going with its whiz-bang aeroplanes and cars and stuff. Look at them. Look at the vorticists in England and the supremacists in Russia and the futurists in Italy. They loved all this tanks and stuff until they didn't a year later. And they saw what this unthinking enthusiasm had wrought. So our globalization happened through this thing in our pocket. And we are communally dismayed by its effect. The first thing it did, of course, was allow the mute, those I began talking about, the beaten down, the beaten up. It allowed them to speak, to scream at us that we don't agree with you. Our response wasn't, well, let us explain. Our response is, don't care, we'll bomb you into agreeing with us. Now, if you're a kid, particularly if you're a young boy in those parts of the wood in that region, the Middle East, and you have no opportunity whatsoever, a zero economy, zero voice, mute, no elective governments, no possibility of a future, and therefore no way to find a woman, to have children, your genetic infinity. You do pick up stones and begin throwing them. You do get out an old sword and burnish it. And if someone hands you an AK-47, you'll use that too. What they had to say to us was utterly, we literally couldn't understand. Hold on, I thought we had this right, us. You want that, don't you? No. No, they actually didn't. And we couldn't accept that they didn't necessarily want what we had. They wanted a version of what they had. And we thought it was imbecilic, it was retrograde. We thought morality can't come from superstition. It can't, actually. But how do you beat belief? Belief will always triumph over reason because you can't disprove belief. So they're certain in their rectitude. What they're doing is right. I park off those murderous thugs that we must get rid of out of the world. They are a living cancer upon us all. There is no rationale. They do have their stories, of course, but they're not to be countenanced. And so when they spoke to us, we were dismayed, didn't get it. And we spoke back, and what we spoke to them with was trivia. Your tweets, your Facebooks, your nonsense. That meant nothing. And it seems that we've used this thing, this great progenitor of this new globalization, we've used it for nonsense, really. Certainly, by osmosis, a new economy was created, but also most of the day, we're just using it for, well, bollocks, really, you know. And possibly it's because things are so very, very serious that we just can't face that ourselves. Woody Allen, of course, Woody Allen, said, "Never before has mankind faced such a crossroads. Down one road is despair and utter hopelessness. Down the other, our total extinction. Let us pray we have the vision to make the right choice." But in his mordant humor, Woody Allen is right. The despair and utter hopelessness is what we encounter in the Middle East. And the road to utter extinction is climate change. It's true. It's even more immediate. And this country in particular, as you well know, will be immensely affected, possibly first, along with the area of Africa that I'm familiar with, where the poor will be hit the worst, where they will be hit the first, and where they've done the least to contribute to this existential problem. Now, you keep talking about leadership. I'm sick of hearing about leaders. I'm in many rooms with the people that you imagined in your head when you were asked to think of a leader. I'm in many rooms a lot of the time with these people. The first thing they do is, congratulations, Mr. President, on your leadership. Shut up. Well. And in Paris in a couple of weeks, I'll be there. And something has to come out of that. It remains to be seen. So in 2015, we seem to face this great crisis of confidence. And yet nature has absolutely told us that biodiversity is the evolutionary norm. It's how you progress, it's how you get to us, the great thinking animal. Morality doesn't come out of superstition, it comes out of the need to be together and to get along. It comes out of society, because if we don't actually improve ourselves. It's the essence of what diversity is. And it is the essence of how we need to get into the 21st century. Because if we cannot understand that this great planetary swirl of people, capital, and ideas is an opportunity. I know now I'm sort of getting into bien-pensant, sort of democratic speak, but actually, I genuinely mean it. We have benefited from it hugely, most of us in this room. This country has definitely benefited from it. You just about surfed the GFC because China, on the make, pulling 400 million people out of extreme poverty, or else the party wouldn't have survived, now desperate to pull the other 800 million out of poverty, was powered into that by yours and African resources. Whole new worlds. You were sort of there, but you weren't right in the middle. You now are. Africa is a coming man. By 2050, it will be a central polar part of the global economy. Amazing. Extraordinary. If you told me 30 years ago when I began working there, I'd have said, can't see it myself, but yes, it is. I raised a private equity fund for Africa 5 years ago. I raised $300 million for new businesses in Africa. We'll do a second round, soft launch in November. Jobs, industry, a lot of the technology you're using these days has been born in Kenya. It's a different world. It's a newer world. It's a very exciting world, a world full of possibility that requires an understanding, an immediate understanding, a sort of clear sitting down and thinking about all these new ideas that come to us. If it's true in nature from whence we come, it is equally true in the biosphere of intellectual thought, our financial values and systems. Diversity is the essence of the 21st century. If the 20th century was defined, if the paradigm was competition and all that that led to, all that murder, then it must be that the paradigm of this century is cooperation, consensus, compromise, and not the hateful, moronic, bilious crap you hear from stupid people like Donald Trump. He is a very stupid man. I mean, seriously, how anyone can be fooled for a second that this is not stupidity in our face. He is a dangerously stupid man. He cannot think. It's not that I'm getting a single idea. And yet, his words articulate the fear of a vast section of America, just like the words of ISIS articulate the fear and the lack of confidence. Trump is the lack of confidence of America. What's happened to us? We can sit down. We can understand each other. Borders do not need to be re-erected that were once coming down. The free flow of people should continue. And with that, the interaction. I live in the madcap experiment of globalization, London. I know this. I have a technology company, an education technology company. When we began, the device that is now in all the schools for data management, all the schools of Britain, required 375 languages to be installed for London. I love it. I can live, I'm lucky, I ended up my life being able to live wherever I want. I choose London. It's the most exciting place, the constant swirl of ideas. Nobody gives a crap what you look like. Wear a f***ing burqa, nobody cares. Just this constant movement and swirl and push and pull. And the Brits have always had it, always. They've been bombarded by ideas and people since time immemorial. They are the most incredible people. Stand advised, I'm Irish. The Normans, the Jutes, the Angles, the Saxons, the Picts, the Celts, the Romans, the Bangladeshis, the Indians, the West Indians, the Africans, the Jews, the Aussies in Earl's Court. And you get this massive churn for a tiny island of finance, of modern culture and of ideas. It's great to walk down a street there. I feel it. We shouldn't all be like Britain for its many faults, but we should be aware and alert and receptive and understanding of these ideas. In order to do it, in order to get there, in order to reject the foul alternatives that are offered us on the television screen, we need to do something that happened to me in Live Aid. I was frightened. I was a pop singer. I saw this thing on television that should not occur, 30 million people potentially dying of starvation in a world of surplus. To die of want in a world of surplus is intellectually absurd, economically illiterate, and of course morally repulsive. So I used my business to do something about it, but it became very big, and I was in danger of being overwhelmed. And I'd always thought that the expression a cold sweat was a metaphor, but Paula used to put a towel underneath me when I went to bed at night because I sweated with fear so much. And it was a cold sweat, it was weird. And of course it was a fear of failure, fear of personal failure, but that was the least of it, a fear of failing those in whose name we were doing this. And in the middle of it, I was talking to people like Thatcher and Reagan and Rupert Murdoch and that, and I thought, I'm out of my depth here. And I was on television, and I was getting a lot of Bob Geldof England letters, which got to be. The best came from Nepal, which was addressed to Bob Geldof, care of Her Majesty the Queen, Buckingham Palace, London. It came to me, sorry we opened this, Sir Bob. And one of the letters came from a guy who saw me on telly the night before, and he said, you look very tired and worried. He said, I think I know what you're going through, but on a different level. And he said, I'm sending you this quote, it might help you because it helped me. And sometimes I pull it out when I'm doing one of these things, sometimes I leave it alone. I'll do it tonight because I'm talking about the need to understand each other. You can call it diversity, you can wrap it up in one of these expensive reports in sort of business kind of bollock speak, you know. But actually it's about empathy. It's about we're going nowhere if we don't get along. It's about getting this century to start and be different. And it's here. I kept it because he was absolutely right. It did help me. I had no real understanding of what was happening to me or why I was doing it in the end, and that it might disastrously fail. But his thing was keep going, keep the clear end in sight, articulate that end and get others around you, because you can't do it by yourself. But to do that, you need this one thing, commitment. Well, you all know it. You know it. You're at the top of your game. You're getting awards for it. You know, in your own relationships, it just doesn't work. And you're talking to a man who got married last month. I thank you very much. That's nice. If we are to get this century to begin, if it's to work out without 1815, 1914, if we are not to go through that, if Raqqa is not to be our Sarajevo moment, if the downing of a Russian plane is not to be the spark that just ignites this fear and fractiousness that I feel as I travel around, and you must feel it. I've never felt the world so fearful, so vociferous. If we are to avoid that, and avoid it we must, if our grandchildren aren't to be the Auntie Fifi and say, do you remember that time before that thing happened? Then remember it now, because we are in grave danger. We are in grave danger of misunderstanding each other, what we're saying, at the same time while being slammed together in this almighty potential. We need to navigate through that. We need to begin this century. We need to use this, the greatest invention of mankind, for other purposes than tweeting nonsense. In order to do that, I suggest that we need the same thing that this man said I needed in 1985, commitment. Until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans, that the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents, meetings, and material assistance which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. That's a quote from a guy called W.H. Murray, who ends it with a quote from Goethe, the great German poet. Perhaps you know it. Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. We need boldness. We need power. But ladies and gentlemen, really above all, right now, we need magic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Bob Geldof, for that very illuminating speech, and we'll hear more from him, obviously, when we assemble our panel for our discussion later tonight. But now I invite you all to enjoy your main courses, and when we come back, we'll have the awards. Enjoy.